In my last video, I talked about NIO Stock, Nvidia, and Tesla, and I just pulled up and shared how many out of the money calls that each of those stocks had heading into the November 21st expiration date, that Friday, and then the max pain amount. And based on the fact that there were a lot of out of the money calls, NIO, these numbers actually got bigger. They had been about 250,000 when I did that video, I think, and they grew to over 315,000 out of the money calls. Max Pain was $6. NIO came in and closed the week at $5.57. So it was a win for the market manipulators. I mean, the market makers. And then when we look at Nvidia was another one where I pointed out of the money calls. I think there were over 1 million when I did the video. That number grew to almost 1.2 million, and the max pain was $180. It closed just under $179. Once again, the market makers or market manipulators, depending on which one you want to call them, they won again. And then Tesla was a little more obvious. That price point was already lower than the max pain of $400 when I did the video. And interestingly enough, although there were a big number of out of the money calls, and I don't remember what it was the other day, over 660,000 by the time the week ended. So once again, the max pain held true. And in the short term, market manipulators or market makers or whatever you want to call them probably made the most money. This stuff doesn't surprise me. And by the way, I offer this and I want to make it actually share it now because I mentioned this in the comment section, but I want to point out my thinking is kind of simple. If Wall Street folks get their bonuses based on intra-year, meaning whatever they're able to trade and make money within the year, and then they get profits or bonuses based on how much profit they were able to create, then that means their time frame is generally within 1 year. It's short term. It's, to me, that's short term. 1 year or less is short term to me. But that also means that they're not looking 5-10 years down the road. Their view is much more geared towards short-term trading and not so much investing, at least not the way I think of investing. I think of investing more of a long-term thing. But I also think that's an advantage that we retail investors can have if we have a long-term view and do not allow the short-term trading and the mechanisms like potential manipulation and naked shorting and things like that to dictate or affect what we're doing in the short term. I think it's really easy money in some cases for big funds, especially some of the market makers who have access to or pay to get access to the retail investors' data and see what they're doing. I think in a way it's kind of like they're predators, and we are the prey if we allow ourselves to be that. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now and let's talk briefly about. I want to go back in time because for those who weren't here on the channel or don't remember this, it was in this time frame. It was the fall. I don't remember exactly when, but it was in 2021 where I did a video and I talked about the company that I called a suspicious short, Citadel, and that they had a shorter put position in NIO. And somebody in the comment section of, it might have been the last video I did, mentioned about Citadel, but they were kind of vague and maybe even misleading with the way that they offered their comment. So here's what I want to point out. Citadel has an over 10.5 million share put position on NIO as of the November 14th, 2025 filing. And I'm going to show you, this is the video that I did more recently. It was the end of July, and I talked about 10 funds that were shorting both Alibaba and NIO. And I basically said, hey, I'm going to come back and we'll do another video. And this is not that video. I'm not doing that video yet. I want to give it more time. I want to go into 2026 and then look back at these 10 funds that I talked about and their shorter put positions. And if you'll notice, Citadel had over 7 million that they were shorter, had a put position with NIO. And then once again, we come back, we see that they have increased their put position in NIO. So, these folks, as a well-known market maker and also having a shorter put position in NIO and other stocks, again, it's kind of back to my earlier point. It doesn't surprise me when we see the short-term minded folks trying to play the options game in the very short term, almost being easy money, perhaps, for the big money folks, and especially those market makers. One final thought, and that is this, with the earnings coming up for NIO Tuesday, it'll be before the market on Tuesday, November 25th. And I'm very curious. I think maybe an indicator for us will be if we see, I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the more recent term because let's go, this is the dilution point for NIO most recently, but the biggest volume days that we've had since then, we've only had a couple, that's 2, 3, 4, 5 days, I think, where we've actually seen over 100 million shares trade during the day for NIO since then. And so that was since about September 10th, roughly September 11th was when they did the dilution. And that was a much bigger number, obviously, then. But since then, only a few days. And the 2 days where it was back to back, the stock price moved up quite a bit, which is kind of a common theme. In fact, if we talk about the history of NIO and going back to the time frame where it moved from $3.50 to over $55 within 6 months, there were 75 days in those 6 months where NIO stock traded over 100 million shares. And that is why I keep it at the bottom of the screen, because if we are talking short term, the trade volume seems to absolutely matter with NIO stock and what we're going to see out of it. And although it did take basically 4 years in a slow, you know, whatever you want to call it, downtrend, I guess, with, from that point where I mentioned about Citadel as a suspicious short getting involved, but they were able to slowly take that thing down, especially as the trade volume died up, dried up, died out, both. We'll call it both things. And so if we see more of these low volume days, it's just easier for them to control stock price action if they want to. But if we go back, because I also want to point this out, if we go back to the option chain and the Max Pain, and look, moving ahead, we don't have another really big out of the money call number popping up until January 16th, 2026. And over here on the right side, if you'll note, even starting this upcoming week after the earnings, on that Friday past the earnings, it's 650 for Max Pain. So it's really going to be interesting to see if, and I won't be surprised if later we find out that some big money firms have been quietly, building positions or adding to positions. But I don't know that, especially if we're thinking in terms of short-term mindset like Wall Street has, if there will be the interest from Wall Street folks to try and play this thing and get gains with it so that they can get their year-end bonuses in this year, if that makes sense. And that is why, I have talked at length about both the bull thesis and the bear thesis in different videos. And basically the bear thesis, the key underlying thought that I have with that is, if big money is going to be the one that really moves this thing to the upside, then, are they going to want to do that this year? And with there being so little time left in the calendar year, I just don't see it, because I don't think they are going to have that interest in making that short-term gain. I think they'll, at least not from this stock, I think it'll be easier for them to do other things. And the markets are crazy anyway right now. So anyway, I don't want to go off for too long because I didn't mean to do an 8-minute video, but I did. So no worries. I'll do chapters or timestamps to make it a little easier to navigate this video. But what are your thoughts with this? Do you think that it would be helpful, maybe even if I covered more of this stuff with different stocks, because normally I don't, my view, as I said before, is and has always kind of been long-term. And so I haven't tried to delve in or dig into, some of these different tickers and things like that. But it was interesting to see with Nvidia supposedly having a great earnings and, being brought down below that Max Pain level with a huge amount, over 1 million out of the money calls. That's crazy. So anyway, I'm just curious to hear from others. Either way, have a great weekend, or whenever you see this, have a great day, night, and I'll see y'all again very soon.